President Biden is in San Francisco today to discuss artificial intelligence. Yesterday, he was talking about climate change with Governor Gavin Newsom and his rich liberal donors. But what he isn't talking about is the rampant crime, homelessness, or the population exodus. But one of his challengers for the Democrat nomination, well, he's talking about it. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he hit the streets of San Francisco, shining a spotlight on the brutal homelessness and drug crises sweeping the state.
This is the Mission District south of Market. This is one of hundreds of street corners in San Francisco that has been occupied now by the homeless, by plastic shanties, by tents, and by people who are sleeping in the open air. We need to rebuild our nation from the ground up, and that's what I'm going to do as president.
So, Harris, RFK is focusing on really important issues, and our president's in a swamp marsh announcing climate change funding?
Well, Bobby Kennedy Jr. doesn't have to be modified in order to make appearances. There don't have to be modifications made around him so that he can make sense. I mean, I look at what he said yesterday when he was with Gavin Newsom. And maybe most importantly, I have committed to it. By 2020, we will have conserve 30% of all lands and waters the United States has jurisdiction over and simultaneously reduce emissions to blunt climate impact. 2020.
Yeah.
In the future. And look, anybody can make a mistake. I get that. It's just that it's added to a whole host of things that are, and that was day one of day 20 of 20 days of him out on the campaign trail. Kennedy is hitting it hard. You're going to see others. Republicans are going to hit it hard during this next 20 days because Biden has to, the conditions have to be modified for him to even have, a modicum of success, not to gaffe, not to, and I'm sorry to say this, not to fall. I don't want anything to happen to the president of the United States. But it is our reality when he says, watch me, that we watch him.
Yeah, and we watched him in the salt marsh. We watched that gaffe. We actually have it, so we'll play it for you, Doug.
By 2020, we will have conserved 30% of all the lands and waters the United States has jurisdiction over and simultaneously reduce emissions to blunt climate impact.
As Harris said, 2020, does he know the year?
Well, obviously we're having trouble with it, at least at that point. The curious thing I have is he giving extemporaneous remarks there, or is just off the picture actually the teleprompter,
yeah.
Which I think there probably is teleprompter. So the question is he reading it wrong? Is he going off prompt? They don't know where it's at. And it's not just this one event, Harrison. I get it. And look, I've been there. We say, mess up a line or whatever, but this is a regular pattern here. And I think the interesting thing here about RFK Jr. and the contrast here is most of Americans, even pollsters on both sides look at this, the climate agenda is not except for one smaller part of the Democratic electorate. Crime, when you have AT&T leaving San Francisco, just announced, they're leaving their flagship store, coming out, Nordstrom's, all these are leaving, and you're not talking about these issues of crime and homelessness, which is under your administration. That's where the disconnect comes. So now you have a Robert F. Kennedy Jr. who they've all disconnected with. I have a lot of my Democrat friends say, this is just a problem, not a problem. He's now been on Rogan, which actually appeals to a very independent audience. He's now this idea of debating about vaccines. He's hit something. Now, whether he can actually overtake a sitting president, probably not. But he's making more waves now that I think Democrats are going to have to take seriously because it is such a vast contrast between the two.
Well, you know what he can do? He can get a number of Democrats to stay home because they won't want to vote for who's on the ticket, and that's a problem.
And he can win New Hampshire, and he can win Iowa because of these rules at the DNC. Marie, I saw in Politico a few weeks ago that the White House was relying on the media to elucidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s record so they wouldn't have to. And like clockwork, here we go, NBC. Knowing Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was the headline in Playbook, and the headline of the NBC article, The Conspiracy Candidate, What RFK Jr.'s anti-vaccine crusade could look like in the White House. So is the media doing the bidding of the president?
No, it's just the truth. He is a conspiracy theorist on a number of different issues, and he says things all the time about vaccines that are just not true.
And he says fact check him. Feel free to do it. By the way, when Kamala Harris told people not to get the vaccine, I didn't hear you pipe up.
Here's the thing. Joe Biden is going to be the nominee, and this election will be a choice between him and whoever the Republican candidate is. I think that climate change actually is a huge issue for younger voters. Independent younger voters, Democratic younger voters, and increasingly Republican younger voters, because they see what's happening in our world and they want someone to pay attention to it. The Democrats are talking. Joe Biden talks about crime. He talks about immigration. And so do members of the House, by the way. And as the House moves further to the right, as Kevin McCarthy gets pulled further to the right, when we look at the full ticket, it's going to be on the ballot next November. Joe Biden will be at the top of a ticket where Democrats have gotten things done. He has passed legislation on a number of issues that the Democrats and independents really, really like. We are starting to see some of that funding, the jobs coming back, manufacturing, prescription drug prices coming down.
Really
Those
quick.
are things that people care about, not RFK Jr. on some
the
weird
economy has
TikTok.
dismal approval ratings. But let me just ask you this, and because I want to get to Emily, but if 20% of your party is supporting RFK Jr., is 20% of your party conspiracy theorists?
I don't think that 20% of the party is supporting RFK
The
Jr.
polls are
I think
wrong.
you can look at any poll on any given day. I do not think that 20% of Democrats are supporting him.
Okay, so the polls are apparently wrong. Emily.
Well, we've all talked about polls before, Kaylee. You know this.
They're wrong, apparently, off by 20%, maybe.
What I'm hearing in that approach is that same dismissive quality that we heard from Nancy Pelosi, for example, when a reporter dared to ask her about President Biden's mental acuity and whether voters minded about the age. And she said, essentially, don't bother me with that. This is why Newsweek called RFK Jr. fringe. Esquire called him a crackpot, called him cannon fodder in the upcoming debates. But however, he's capturing 20% of the Democrat Party's vote. So clearly he isn't cannon fodder. He's not crackpot. He's not fringe in every topic that voters find important. And when we sort of slough off his video as a weird TikTok video, so too does the president and every one of his surrogates engage in the use of TikTok as a very important vehicle to them of the one voting bloc that matters, which is young, climate change prioritized children. And that is who he was talking to in California. Because in California, where I'm from, your vote does not matter if you do not prioritize as number one climate change only. If you dare to speak up about crime, if you dare to speak up about underserved populations getting the worst end of the deal by the fleeing businesses, the fleeing pharmacies, the fleeing everything, your voice still doesn't matter. It is all about them sort of knee-jerking to this voting bloc that they have prioritized over all other Americans. It is not working as evidenced by those polls.
But you've got to read what Bobby Kennedy Jr. is saying about Green. No, he's not AOC. And even Republicans and some pretty high up on the Hill are listening to some of his ideas because they're baseline money based. Like, we can afford to do some of those things. Dig into it, because he's gonna come at the president with some of the stuff.
He is appealing to a lot of people. I just can't wait to see Joe Exotic start making gains on Joe Biden, because he's running. Did you hear that? I'm joking.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.